High Proctor Cthar of the Glyptodontian spire adjusted his ceremonial stoles, which were woven from the shed cartilage of his own ancestors, a fact he mentioned at least twice per lecture. The gesture was meant to convey gravitas. To the lone human in the class, it mostly looked like he was fiddling with a set of particularly stiff and uncooperative placemats. Cthar's voice, a resonant baritone that sounded like rocks having a polite disagreement, filled the sterile biodome. The bond between a sentry being and its chosen life form is not mere ownership, he droned, his four upper eyes scanning the cohort of varied students while his lower four focused on the glowing lectern. It is a sacred, psychospiritual covenant. A melding of wills. A symbiotic resonance that transcends mere verbal communication. Around the amphitheater, 21 of the galaxy's most promising young cadets nodded with the appropriate level of reverence. There was Grak, a hulking Krogan-adjacent being whose species communicated primarily through escalating levels of headbutting, now sitting so still his granite-like skin was developing moss in the biodome's humid air. There was Lila, a Xylosion whose shimmering, semi-corporeal form drifted a few inches above her seat, her thoughts a gentle hum of focused psychic energy. And there was Zorp, a diminutive mephitoid who was surrounded by a cloud of tiny, whirring sensor drones that were probably live-streaming the lecture for extra credit. And then there was Alex. Alex was human. He was currently engaged in the sacred, psycho-spiritual covenant of trying to discreetly dislodge a piece of yesterday's nutrient bar from between his molars using only his tongue. He had been sent to the Intergalactic Preparatory Academy for promising young beings on a scholarship that was, by all accounts, a clerical error. He was supposed to be at a comparative mythology seminar on Rigel 7, but a misplaced decimal point in his application code had landed him in the Advanced Xenobeast Empathy course instead. He tried to correct it, but the Academy's registrar was a sentient nebula with a 3,000-year backlog, so he just decided to roll with it. Each of you has been assigned a creature whose temperament and biosignature complements your own species' inherent strengths, Cthar continued, gesturing grandly to the containment pens behind him. With a hum, the opaque energy fields dissolved, revealing the bonding partners. The collective gasp from the students was entirely justified. These weren't space hamsters. Grak's partner was a Chthonian mauler, a 10-foot-tall beast of muscle and rage with a face that looked like a car accident involving a wood chipper and a box of razors. Lila was paired with a psion eel, a creature of pure, writhing energy that pulsed with raw mental power. Zorp got a silicon slitherer, a crystalline serpent that consumed data and excreted complex algorithms. They were all magnificent, terrifying, and deeply impressive. Alex's creature was a thing. It was roughly the size of a large dog, covered in fur that shimmered in and out of focus, and had far too many legs, all of which seemed to be moving in different directions at once. Two large, soulful black eyes sat above a mouth that was currently trying to chew on the concept of Tuesday. According to the datapad, it was a Glimmershrike, a creature native to a dimension where the laws of physics were more of a polite suggestion. You have one standard cycle, Cthar announced, his voice booming with authority. Begin the bonding process. The Manual of Empathetic Union, chapters 4 through 17, details the primary rituals. Meditate. Resonate. Connect. Show me you are worthy of the trust these noble beasts will place in you. Immediately, the biodome was a hive of activity. Grak puffed up his chest and let out a deafening roar, a traditional greeting of strength to the Chthonian mauler. The mauler roared back, smashing a claw against its pen wall in what was apparently a sign of burgeoning respect. Lila closed her eyes, her form glowing brighter as she extended a tendril of pure thought toward the psion eel, attempting to create a harmonic frequency. Zorp's drone swarmed the silicon slitherer, running comparative analyses and offering it a small data packet of prime numbers as a friendship gift. Alex just stood there. He watched his Glimmershrike attempt to walk through a solid wall, bounce off, then get momentarily distracted by its own tail. He looked at the chaos of the other students, then back at the weird, fuzzy, dimensionally unstable dog thing. He sighed. The Manual of Empathetic Union was 800 pages of dense academic theory that advised things like, attuning one's soul frequency to the creature's ancestral memory field. Alex had tried reading it, but fell asleep and drooled on the chapter about vibrational chanting. Cthar was already making a note on his datapad, his lower eyes narrowed in disapproval at the humans in action. Subject: human, Alex. Displays typical species-wide lack of spiritual depth. Unfocused. Prone to distraction. Unlikely to achieve even a rudimentary level 1 bond. Alex ignored him. He took a casual step forward, stuck 2 fingers in his mouth, and let out a short, sharp whistle. It wasn't a particularly loud whistle. It wasn't imbued with psychic energy or subsonic frequencies. It was the kind of whistle you'd use to get a cab's attention, or to call your dog back when it's sniffing something unspeakable in the park. It was, in the grand, cosmic scheme of things, profoundly and utterly mundane. And that's when everything went sideways. The Glimmershrike, which had been in the middle of phasing its left hind leg into a theoretical dimension, froze. Its head snapped up. Its large, soulful eyes locked onto Alex. The shimmering quality of its fur stabilized, becoming solid and tangible. Then, with a happy little "yurf" sound that seemed to violate several known principles of acoustics, it trotted, all legs suddenly cooperating, directly to Alex's side and began nudging his hand with its nose. Alex, without even thinking, started scratching it behind an ear-like appendage. The creature leaned into it, its multi-jointed tail thumping a frantic, happy rhythm against the floor. That, in itself, was enough to make Kthar's mandibles clench. A perfect, instantaneous bond of obedience and affection, achieved without a single line of vibrational chanting. Unheard of. Preposterous. It was a statistical anomaly, a fluke. He was already preparing a lecture about the dangers of anthropomorphism and misinterpreting random creature behavior. But it didn't stop there. Across the biodome, Grak's Chthonian mauler, which had been about to engage in a ritualistic bout of chest-pounding with its potential partner, stopped mid-pound. Its horrifying face, a cartographer's nightmare of jagged angles and superfluous teeth, swiveled away from the equally horrifying Krogan thing and stared directly at Alex. Its expression, which usually ranged from murderous to apoplectic, softened into something that could almost be described as expectant. Lila's psioniel, which had been weaving a complex tapestry of psychic energy around her, suddenly unspooled itself. The intricate mental conversation it was having with the Xylosion abruptly ended with the psychic equivalent of a dial tone. The eel of pure thought drifted lazily through the air, away from Lila, and came to a halt about 10 feet from the human, hovering patiently. Zorp's silicon slitherer, which had been joyfully devouring the data packet of prime numbers, regurgitated a half-digested 7 and oriented its crystalline head toward the source of the whistle. Its usual cold, logical aura was replaced by a distinct vibe of, did someone say walkies? One by one, every single creature in the biodome, from the 6-legged, acid-spitting grognard to the tiny, fluffy, yet surprisingly dense singularity hamster, disengaged from their assigned cadets. They all turned. They all faced Alex. And they all sat down, as if waiting for a command. The entire collection of deadly, exotic, and legendary fauna from across the known galaxy looked like a particularly well-behaved puppy obedience class. There was a profound, stunned silence in the room, broken only by the gentle thumping of the Glimmershrike's tail and the quiet hum of Zorp's drones, which had all swiveled to scan Alex with an air of profound confusion. Grak was the first to speak, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. "What did you do?" Alex looked up from scratching the Glimmershrike's head. He looked at the Chthonian mauler, whose gaze was now fixed on him with the intensity of a dog waiting for a ball to be thrown. He saw the psioniel, the silicon slitherer, and the 20 other cosmic horrors all sitting politely in a semicircle around him. He shrugged. I whistled. High Proctor Kthar's 4 upper eyes were twitching. His lower 4 were rapidly cycling through the index of the Manual of Empathetic Union, searching for any mention of whistling. There was none. There were sections on olfactory signaling, telepathic harmonics, and ritualistic displays of non-threatening postures. There was an entire appendix on the proper way to present a sacrificial offering of crystallized sorrow to a grief-eater from the Sorrow Nebulae. There was absolutely nothing about making a sharp, airy noise with one's mouth. Impossible. Kthar boomed, his voice cracking slightly. The cartilage stoles rustled with agitation. That was not a recognized bonding technique. You have employed some form of illicit technology. A sonic scrambler. A mass hypnosis frequency. Cadets, secure your assigned creatures. This is a breach of protocol. This was easier said than done. Grak stomped over to his Chthonian mauler and put a heavy hand on its shoulder. Mauler. Attend me. We have rituals to perform. The mauler didn't even flinch. It kept its eyes locked on Alex, letting out a low whine. It was the sound a creature weighing 3 tons makes when it's hoping someone might have a biscuit. Lila drifted towards her psioniel, her psychic voice a gentle, pleading whisper in the ether. My friend, our minds were just beginning to touch. Let us continue our dance, the psionial responded with the mental equivalent of a distracted shrug, its energy field still oriented towards the human. It was like trying to have a deep conversation with someone who is very, very invested in a squirrel outside the window. Zorp had the most direct approach. He flew one of his drones right up to the silicon slitherer's face. Subject 734, my analysis indicates your current behavior is a 978% deviation from predicted bonding parameters. Please resume ingestion of prime numbers. The slitherer simply nudged the drone aside with its snout and continued to stare at Alex. Kthar's composure, usually as solid as the ancient rock of his homeworld, was beginning to fracture. Cadet Alex. Cease this auditory vandalism at once. Release these creatures from your illegal control. Alex stopped scratching the Glimmershrike, which whined in protest. He held up his hands in a gesture of placating innocence. I'm not doing anything. I just whistled once. They're the ones being weird. Weird does not begin to describe this flagrant disregard for established xenological principles. Kthar snapped. He pointed a trembling, four-fingered hand at Alex. You are clearly emitting a signal. Cadet Zorp. Conduct a full-spectrum diagnostic on the human. I want to know what frequency he is using, what pheromones he is secreting, what bioelectric field he is projecting. I will have the source of this charlatanism. Zorp, who lived for this kind of thing, chirped in delight. With pleasure, High Proctor. A dozen of his drones detached from their cloud and zipped towards Alex, who stood patiently as they began to swarm around him. They bathed him in light of various spectra. Tiny needles extended and took microscopic air samples around his skin. Scanners measured his body temperature, heart rate, and brainwave activity. The entire process was accompanied by a series of high-pitched whirs and clicks. The other cadets watched, a mixture of awe, suspicion, and jealousy on their faces. Grak looked from his obstinately docile Mauler to the skinny, baffling human, and back again, his entire understanding of dominance hierarchies crumbling before his very eyes. Lila was trying to read Alex's aura, but reported back that it was just a confusing jumble of vague contentment, mild hunger, and a stubbornly repeating internal melody about some sort of infancy predator. After a full minute of intense scanning, Zorp's lead drone zipped back to its master. Zorp tilted his head, processing the data. He ran the numbers again. And again. Finally, he looked up at the High Proctor, his multifaceted eyes blinking in confusion. Well? Kthar demanded. The results are inconclusive, High Proctor, Zorp reported, sounding bewildered. Which is to say, they are entirely conclusive. There is nothing. Nothing. No illegal sonic emitters. No pheromonal agents. No unusual bioelectric fields. His brainwave activity is well within the baseline for a resting primate. If anything, it's remarkably placid. The only anomaly is a slightly elevated presence of sodium chloride and lipid residue on his fingertips, consistent with the consumption of a preserved meat product. Kthar stared, dumbfounded. He looked at Alex. He looked at the 22 creatures sitting in rapt attention. He looked back at Alex. His entire academic career, his life's work, the wisdom of the Glyptodontian spires passed down through generations, was being undone by a calm primate and some salty finger grease. A preserved meat product, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Alex, feeling the need to contribute, reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, vacuum-sealed packet. On the front, in stark, functional lettering, it read, Guaranteed Nutrient Paste, Flavor, Bovine. He tore it open with his teeth and squeezed a small, brownish lump into his palm. More commonly known on Earth as beef jerky. Want some? He asked, holding it out to Kthar. The High Proctor just stared at the offering as if Alex had handed him a live grenade. The Chthonian Mauler, however, whined again, louder this time, and took a hopeful step forward. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of shattered paradigms. It was in this moment that the narrator, that's me, by the way, hello, feels the need to pause and explain something that the entire collected intelligence of the Galactic Center seems to have missed. You see, most advanced species in the galaxy evolved in one of two ways. They were either so overwhelmingly powerful that they became the apex predators of their worlds through sheer force, or they were so psychically gifted that they bent reality to their will. They never had to ask for cooperation. They commanded it, or they enforced it. Humans, on the other hand, were squishy, slow, and had pathetic teeth. We couldn't outrun a savanna cat or outwrestle a bear. So, we developed a different superpower. It wasn't fire, or tools, or even language. It was co-option. We looked at the terrifying gray wolf, a creature of fong and fury, and we didn't just see a threat. We saw a potential ally. We saw a partner. We figured out, through millennia of trial and error, that most creatures with a central nervous system and a stomach operate on a pretty simple principle: a reliable source of food and non-threatening affection is a better deal than constantly fighting for your next meal. That whistle. It's not magic. It's a sonic trigger, honed over thousands of years of partnership with other species. It's a sound that has become genetically hardwired into the descendants of those first wolves. It's a sound that says, "Hey, you. Pay attention. Something good might happen." And that instinct, that fundamental reward-seeking behavior, is shockingly universal. It turns out that a glimmershrike from the fifth dimension isn't so different from a golden retriever. Both just want to know who's a good boy, and both are highly interested in the possibility of snacks. Alex, of course, didn't know any of this academic theory. He just knew that if you were nice to an animal and occasionally gave it a treat, it tended to like you. When Kthar finally found his voice and stammered, "Explain yourself, human. What is the principle behind this trick?" Alex simply broke off a piece of the beef jerky. He looked at his glimmershrike, which was practically vibrating with anticipation. "This," he said, holding up the jerky. "It's a high-value reward. You use it to reinforce positive behavior." He tossed the piece to the glimmershrike, which caught it deftly and devoured it in a single gulp. Then, for good measure, he looked at the massive chthonian mauler, which was now drooling a viscous, acidic substance onto the floor. Alex shrugged and tossed a much larger piece in its direction. The mauler snapped it out of the air, its terrifying jaws making a surprisingly gentle crunching sound. It then sat back down, looking even more devoted than before. Reinforce positive behavior. Kthar repeated the words as if they were from a dead language. The Manual of Empathetic Union spoke of soul merging and ancestral echoes, not bribery. "Yeah," Alex said, popping a piece of jerky into his own mouth. "It's pretty basic. They do something you want, they get a treat. They do something you don't want, they don't get a treat. Eventually, they just do the stuff that gets them treats. It's not rocket science." Kthar stared at him, his four upper eyes wide with a horrifying, dawning comprehension. You are domesticating them," he said the word with the same horror and disgust one might use to say, "You are flossing with my ancestral cartilage." For Kthar and the rest of the galactic community, domestication was a primitive, barbaric concept. You didn't train a noble beast, you formed a partnership of equals. You didn't offer it treats, you engaged in a mutual exchange of spiritual energy. To apply such a crude, simplistic system to creatures of cosmic significance was the ultimate insult. It was like trying to teach a sentient star to fetch. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Every single creature in the biodome was now looking at Alex with unwavering, food-motivated devotion. Grak's bond of dominance had been superseded by jerky. Lila's psychic resonance had been short-circuited by a whistle. Zorp's data-driven friendship offering had been snubbed in favor of preserved bovine protein. Desperate to salvage the situation and prove the validity of his entire existence, Kthar drew himself up to his full height. His stoles of ancestor cartilage bristled. This is a perversion of the sacred bond. A cheap parlor trick that relies on base instinct, not true connection. It will not hold up under pressure. A true bond is tested in adversity, not in the sterile confines of this dome. He strode to the master control panel. Therefore, we will proceed immediately to the capstone challenge. The labyrinth of unfathomable peril. A murmur of shock went through the other cadets. The labyrinth was the final exam, usually scheduled for the end of the semester after months of intensive bonding. It was a notoriously difficult trial, a massive, shifting maze filled with environmental hazards and aggressive, unbonded fauna. The goal was to navigate it using only the unique abilities of your bonded creature. Most cadets failed on their first attempt. To send them in now, with their bonds so new and, in most cases, completely non-existent thanks to Alex, was a death sentence. Kthar jabbed a button on the console. A huge section of the far wall irised open, revealing a dark, foreboding entrance from which a cold, musty wind blew. Enter, cadets. Navigate the labyrinth with your partners. We will see how effective the humans' training is when faced with a real threat. We will see if a treat can save you from a pack of territorial skitterhounds. He was practically shouting now, a being of pure academic fury. He clearly expected Alex's control to shatter at the first sign of danger, for the creatures to revert to their feral instincts, proving his methods superior. He thought he was calling Alex's bluff. He had no idea that Alex wasn't bluffing. Alex wasn't even playing the same game. Alex just looked at the dark entrance, then at the Glimmershrike by his side. He gave its head another scratch. "All right, boy," he said, his voice calm and casual. "Wanna go for a walk?" The Glimmershrike yipped excitedly, its tail a blurry whirlwind of interdimensional motion. The other cadets looked at each other in panic. "But Proctor," Lila began, her voice a tremor of psychic static, "our bonds are not formed." "The Mauler will not obey me," Grak added, gesturing to the beast that was still staring at Alex's jerky pocket. "Then your failure will serve as a valuable lesson." Kthar thundered, unwilling to back down. "The human has demonstrated his method. Let us see it tested." Enter. With a heavy sense of dread, the cadets began to shuffle towards the labyrinth's entrance. Grak had to physically drag his Chthonian Mauler, who dug its claws into the floor like a cat being forced into a carrier. Lila's Psioniel followed her with a distinct lack of enthusiasm. Zorp's Silicon Slitherer had to be tempted forward with a trail of data crumbs. Alex, however, just walked. He stepped past the threshold into the damp darkness of the labyrinth. The Glimmershrike trotted happily at his heels. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could hear the soft, heavy footfalls of the Chthonian Mauler, the faint crackle of the Psioniel, and the crystalline slithering of the data serpent following him into the dark. In his desperation to prove Alex wrong, Kthar hadn't just sent Alex and his creature into the labyrinth. He'd sent Alex and his entire, newly acquired, multi-species pack. The labyrinth of unfathomable peril lived up to its name. The corridors were carved from living rock that slowly shifted and changed, ensuring no map was ever accurate for more than a few minutes. Bioluminescent fungi provided the only light, casting long, eerie shadows that played tricks on the eyes. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something vaguely metallic, like old blood. For the other cadets, it was a nightmare. Grak found himself in a corridor that was rapidly shrinking. His method of dealing with problems was to hit them, but punching the walls only seemed to make them close faster. He needed his Mauler to brace the walls, to use its immense strength to hold them apart. But the Mauler, which was trailing about 50 feet behind him, was too busy trying to get a better look at what Alex was doing up ahead to pay Grak any mind. Lila, meanwhile, was being assaulted by psychic feedback. The labyrinth was home to countless primitive life forms, and their collective fear and aggression created a cacophony of mental noise that felt like 1,000 nails scratching on the inside of her skull. She needed her Psioniel to act as a psychic filter, to create a shield of calm around her. The eel, however, was currently floating placidly in Alex's wake, its own mental state a serene blank slate, completely untroubled by the ambient chaos. Zorp was having technical difficulties. The dampness was shorting out 2 of his sensor drones, and the shifting magnetic fields of the rock were playing havoc with his navigation systems. His Silicon Slitherer could have helped, its crystalline structure allowed it to sense geological and magnetic patterns with perfect clarity. It could have guided him. Instead, it was slithering along near Alex's feet, occasionally nudging his leg in a silent, hopeful plea for more of that delicious bovine-flavored paste. And Alex? Alex was just walking. The Glimmershrike trotted beside him, its weird, multidimensional nature allowing it to occasionally step through a wall that had just shifted to block their path, then poke its head back out on the other side as if to say, "This way." Up ahead, they heard a series of guttural clicks and snarls. This was the first real test Kthar had been so excited about. A pack of skitterhounds, the labyrinth's resident security system. They were fast, 6-legged predators with exoskeletons of obsidian chitin and jaws that could shear through plasteel. They were notoriously aggressive and territorial. A dozen of them poured out of a side tunnel, blocking the path. They were sleek, black, and utterly terrifying, their multiple red eyes glowing in the gloom. They lowered their heads, drooling acidic saliva, and let out a synchronized hiss. Grak, catching up, braced himself for a fight. Lila prepared a weak psychic shield. Zorp recalled his drones, writing them off as a loss. Alex stopped. He looked at the lead skitterhound, a particularly large specimen with scars crisscrossing its chitinous face. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't prepare to run. He just tilted his head. Then he made a soft, clicking sound with his tongue. TSK, TSK, TSK. It was a sound he used to use on squirrels in his backyard to get them to stop raiding the bird feeder. It was a sound of mild disapproval, but also of attention. The lead skitterhound froze mid-snarl. Its head snapped up, its red eyes focusing on Alex. The aggressive posture slackened slightly. It took a hesitant step forward, sniffing the air. It could smell the Glimmershrike, the Mauler, the Eel, and the Slitherer. It could smell the other cadets. But underneath it all, it could smell something else. The faint, alluring scent of salted, dried meat. Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out another piece of jerky. He held it out on his flat palm. "Hey there," he said, his voice even. "You guys hungry?" The lead skitterhound stared at the jerky. It looked back at its pack, who were all watching with a similar sense of confusion. Its predatory instincts were screaming at it to attack, to defend its territory. But a deeper, more ancient instinct was whispering something else. That instinct told it that the small, soft creature in front of it was not a threat, and that it was offering free food. Free food was, evolutionarily speaking, a fantastic deal. Slowly, cautiously, the lead hound padded forward. It stopped a few feet from Alex, its head low. It sniffed his outstretched hand. Then, with surprising delicacy, its serrated jaws plucked the piece of jerky from his palm. It crunched it down, and then looked back at Alex, its previously menacing red eyes now holding a glimmer of something else. Hope. Alex smiled and produced more jerky, tossing pieces to the other hounds. Within a minute, the entire pack of terrifying, territorial murder beasts was sitting in a circle, crunching contentedly on nutrient paste. The lead hound, its belly full, nudged Alex's leg and then turned, trotting down the corridor and looking back over its shoulder, a clear invitation to follow. It had just decided that this strange, food-dispensing primate was now the alpha of its pack. From the observation room, Kthar watched on the monitors, his mandibles hanging open. "No," he whispered. "They are genetically coded for hyperaggression. They cannot be pacified. It is not in the literature." Alex started walking again. His Glimmershrike was at his side. And behind him, trotting in a disciplined formation, was a pack of 12 skitterhounds. Grak, Lila, and Zorp, utterly defeated, simply fell into line behind the hounds. Alex wasn't just navigating the labyrinth anymore. He was collecting it. He was leading a parade of monsters, and he was doing it with cheap snacks and the kind of casual authority one usually reserves for walking a well-behaved poodle. The labyrinth of unfathomable peril had just become Alex's afternoon stroll. The parade continued to grow. They encountered a swarm of razor-winged pterodactyls, which were supposed to be an aerial hazard. Alex just tossed jerky into the air. The pterodactyls, instead of dive-bombing the cadets, began circling overhead in a protective pattern, hoping for more handouts. They navigated a chasm filled with sentient, grasping vines by having the Chthonian Mauler, now eager to please, rip the vines out of the wall and braid them into a sturdy bridge. The Mauler didn't do it because Grak commanded it, it did it because Alex gave it an approving nod and the promise of a particularly large piece of jerky on the other side. Lila's psychic headache had vanished. The sheer, uncomplicated contentment radiating from Alex and his ever-growing menagerie was acting as a massive psychic buffer, drowning out the ambient noise of the labyrinth. She found herself walking in a bubble of serene, food-motivated peace. Zorp, for his part, had given up on analysis and was now just recording everything. The data was nonsensical, it defied every known model of animal behavior, but it was happening. He was documenting the birth of a whole new, baffling field of study, applied Terran bribery. The group was now a truly ridiculous sight. At the front was Alex, hands in his pockets, strolling casually. Beside him, the Glimmershrike. Behind them, the Chthonian Mauler walked with the careful gait of an overeager bodyguard. The Psion drifted above like a personal blimp. The Silicon Slitherer moved alongside, its crystalline body reflecting the light from the escort of skitterhounds, who had formed a perfect perimeter guard. Overhead, the razor wings circled. Grak, Lila, and Zorp just trailed behind, looking like the bewildered roadies for the universe's weirdest rock band. They reached the final chamber. It was a vast cavern, and in its center, guarding the exit portal, was the capstone challenge's final exam, the Chronoscorgon. This was the beast Kthar had been counting on. The one creature that couldn't be tamed, trained, or reasoned with. The Chronoscorgon didn't exist entirely in the present. It was a temporal anomaly, a creature whose body shimmered and phased between past, present, and future. One moment it was a hatchling, the next a withered ancient, the next a prime hunter, all at once. Its gaze could trap you in a time loop, and its touch could erase you from the timeline altogether. It was considered unbondable because you couldn't form a connection with something that wasn't consistently there. The strategy in the manual was to create a diversion and slip past while it was distracted by a different temporal probability. As Alex's procession entered the cavern, the Chronoscorgon reared up. It was a terrifying vortex of scales, claws, and eyes, all flickering through different stages of their existence. A dozen versions of its roar echoed at once, some high-pitched and young, others deep and ancient. It fixed its gaze, 1,000 eyes from 1,000 moments in time, on the intruders. In the observation room, Kthar leaned forward, a grim smile finally returning to his face. Now, he hissed to himself. Now we see the limits of jerky, let us see the human train, a paradox. The skitterhounds whimpered and flattened themselves against the ground. The mauler growled, but with uncertainty. The Gorgon was beyond their comprehension. Alex didn't hesitate. He walked forward, alone, stopping about 20 feet from the shimmering, time-displaced horror. He didn't look at the flickering images of its past or future. He looked right at the center of the storm, at the part of it that was most solidly in the now. He reached into his pocket. It was the last piece of jerky. The big one he'd been saving. He held it out. The Chronoscorgon paused. All of its temporal echoes seemed to focus. The hatchling, the adult, and the ancient all saw the same thing, a small, dark object in the primate's hand. It smelled intriguing. It smelled of salt and protein and a distant, alien animal that had once roamed grassy plains under a yellow sun. It was a smell that was novel and interesting in every single timeline it occupied. Alex didn't throw it. He just stood there, holding it out, a patient offering. He made that soft clicking sound with his tongue again. For the first time in its existence, the Chronoscorgon experienced a moment of perfect temporal unity. Every version of itself, from the moment of its birth to the moment of its death, was united by a single, overwhelming thought, I want that. The shimmering slowed. The beast coalesced, becoming more solid, more present than it had ever been. It took a step forward, its multiple legs moving in something approaching unison. It lowered its head, a dozen different past and future versions of that head all moving as one. With a gentleness that was utterly shocking, a mouth that was currently in its prime, adult stage plucked the final piece of jerky from Alex's hand. It swallowed. The entire creature seemed to shudder with a moment of pure, unified satisfaction. Then, all 1,000 of its eyes blinked, and it looked at Alex with a new, profound understanding. This small creature wasn't a threat. It was a provider. A friend. Alex reached out and patted its flank, a flank that was, at that moment, solid and warm. The Chronoscorgon leaned into the touch, a low, purring rumble echoing from its past, present, and future throats simultaneously. Alex gave it one last scratch, then turned and walked towards the exit portal. Come on, guys, he called over his shoulder. Let's go. He stepped through the portal. The Glimmershrike followed. Then the Chthonian Mauler. Then the Psioniel and the Silicon Slitherer. Then the entire pack of skitterhounds and the circling razor wings. Then the other, utterly stunned cadets. Finally, the Chronoscorgon, now completely placid, took one last look around its cavern and, deciding this new arrangement was far more interesting, lumbered through the portal after them. When the group emerged back into the biodome, it was to the sight of a completely catatonic High Proctor. Kthar stood by the console, his stoles limp, his 4 upper eyes staring into the middle distance, his 4 lower eyes locked on the Chronoscorgon, which was now nudging Alex's empty pocket expectantly. He had sent 1 human and 1 Glimmershrike into the labyrinth. What came back was 1 human leading a small, mobile ecosystem of perfectly obedient, formerly lethal fauna, including a creature previously classified as a sentient temporal paradox. Kthar stammered, his voice a dry rasp. The manual, the sacred texts of xyloethology, they did not account for this. Alex just shrugged, a gesture that was now becoming his signature. He gestured to the Glimmershrike, who was trying to lick his face with a tongue that tasted faintly of ozone and probability. You said to bond with it. You didn't say how. He's a good boy, though. Mostly, he looked over at the Kronos Gorgon. She is too. Just a little misunderstood. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, at least for the field of traditional xenobeast empathy. Kthar's entire curriculum was scrapped overnight. The 800-page Manual of Empathetic Union was reclassified as a historical document, filed under well-intentioned but fundamentally flawed pre-Terran methodologies. A new course was instated, mandatory for all cadets in the empathy track. It was called Practical Terran Domestication Techniques 101. The final scene, weeks later, was almost too perfect. High Proctor Kthar, now demoted to Assistant Lecturer Kthar, stood miserably before a new class of cadets. His ancestral stoles had been replaced with a simple, functional apron equipped with multiple pockets. All right, cadets, he sighed, his voice devoid of its former booming confidence. Today, we will be covering the clicker. He held up a small plastic device. According to our guest lecturer, this is a tool for marking desired behaviors. You press the button at the precise moment the creature performs the action, creating a positive association with the accompanying treat. He gestured to a large bin filled with packets. The label was all too familiar: guaranteed nutrient paste, flavor, bovine. At the front of the room, sitting backwards in a chair with his feet up on the desk, was Alex. He looked profoundly bored. He was the guest lecturer. His only duty was to occasionally interject with advice like, "Nah, you gotta use a higher value reward for that one. Try the salmon flavor, or make sure you don't click too late, it'll just confuse him." Grak, now top of the class, was expertly teaching a baby grognard to sit using a clicker and tiny bits of jerky. Lila had discovered that her psionial loved having its energy field scratched with a focused telepathic pulse. Zorp was writing a best-selling paper titled The Jerky Paradigm, a quantitative analysis of protein-based behavioral modification in transdimensional fauna. And as Kthar droned on about the importance of timing and positive reinforcement, the narrator, still me, thanks for sticking around, could only smile. Humanity had finally revealed its greatest, most absurdly powerful secret to the galaxy. It wasn't faster-than-light travel, or planet-destroying weapons, or godlike artificial intelligence. It was the simple, undeniable, universe-conquering truth that there's no problem, no monster, no cosmic horror that can't be solved by looking it straight in its many, many eyes and sincerely asking, "Who's a good boy?" and having a snack ready just in case.